Welcome to On What Slender Threads. My name is Lynn, and this is Tradition 4. This presentation is based on a book I wrote, On What Slender Threads, AA's 12 Traditions from a Historical Perspective. However, it is not necessary to buy the book unless you'd like to have it around for a resource. It is my hope that these video presentations will highlight what I learned from studying research on AA's early history, from the literature available at the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous, and most of all from the experiences and insights of AA friends around the world. I am not a spokesperson for AA. Any inferences in this study are strictly my own and in no way reflect the opinion of Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope it will be helpful. I like to start with a preamble that fits the tradition for each week. So for the fourth tradition I chose, we AAs have universally adopted the principle of consultation. This means that if a single AA group wishes to take any action that might affect surrounding groups, it consults them, or as appropriate, the intergroup or the General Service Board, from Language of the Heart. And if a group has found something better than AA, or they were able to improve on our methods, then in all probability we would adopt what they have discovered for general use everywhere. Healthy trial and error always have their day and place in AA. From Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age. Now, unity, that is, all AAs who participate in the general service structure have a voice, and common welfare is ensured by that structure. Informed and spiritual decision-making is made by the group, not by the individuals. And the only requirement for membership in AA is a self-declared desire to stop drinking. Remember that the original points, except for his second point, go into greater detail. To me, it's as if Bill wanted to reassure AA groups that his hoped-for conference would come with guardrails. And this seemed to play out particularly with the original point to Tradition 4. Tradition 4 says each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. But in the original point, Bill wrote, with respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. But when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups also, those groups ought to be consulted. And no group, regional committee, or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. On such issues, our common welfare is paramount. Well, let's take a capsule look at Bill's essay on Tradition 4 in the 12 and 12. Bill said that autonomy means that every AA group can manage its affairs exactly as it pleases, except when AA as a whole is threatened. And again, he goes back into those repeated admonishments that he had to fight against when he was posing the conference. Children of chaos, we have defiantly played with every brand of fire only to emerge unharmed, and we think wiser. These very deviations created a vast process of trial and error, which under the grace of God has brought us to where we stand today. And he goes on to say that any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. He went on and said, we had been given the courage to declare that each AA group, an individual entity, strictly reliant on its own conscience as a guide to action, that is, the group conscience. And then finally, he says this again for the third time in the first 4 paragraphs of his essay. He says a group ought not do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor ought it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else. Do you think he was trying to make a point? He said sobriety had to be its sole objective. Now, in all other respects, he's reassuring the groups that there was perfect freedom of will and action. Every group had the right to be wrong. And then he goes into the innovations that were created in Middleton, the big alcoholic center, a kind of pilot plant that AA groups could duplicate everywhere. And of course, this would take a lot of money, other people's money. And he even talked about how they thought they could apply for a charter from the foundation, which was a unique idea. And certainly a promoter helped to build these ideas. And to ensure that it would work, they came up with 61 rules and regulations. Well, then confusion replaced serenity. The head promoter wrote the foundation office after everything fell apart, and he said he wished he'd paid attention to AA experience. And he came up with Middleton Group number 1, Rule 62, don't take yourself too damn seriously. Even the chief architect standing in the ruins of his dream could laugh at himself, and that is the very acme of humility. Well, when Bill wrote the short form, he clearly softened the tone of the original form's first sentence with respect to its own affairs. Each AA group should be responsible to no other authority than its own conscience. As Bill was selling the points, the wording was probably meant to be more reassuring to existing groups rather than newly forming groups. Reflecting on his experiences with early groups, well, it made sense for me to call this chapter, You Can't Tell Us What to Do. Unfortunately, this disposition seems to be many AA's very limited understanding of the fourth tradition. Well, what the fourth tradition is and what it isn't. To paraphrase a past AA trustee, invoking the fourth tradition usually means someone is getting ready to back a tractor over 4 to 6 of the other traditions. To the contrary, practicing the fourth tradition is not licensed to overrule any other tradition. A good analogy is offered by the 12 Traditions Illustrated pamphlet, where it says it is like the fourth step. A group should take a fearless and honest inventory that includes the question, would our plans break any other tradition? The fourth tradition, with the other traditions, allows groups to establish some of their own customs and practices for their meetings and for other activities, all with the aim of carrying out AA's primary purpose, to help alcoholics who still struggle. More to Bill's way of thinking, as revealed in his writing, autonomy allows groups to be innovative, to experiment with new approaches to serve the struggling alcoholic. Why? Because having a written program of recovery vis-a-vis the big book was not enough to ensure unity. I mean, the publication of the big book must have given Bill a brief sense of security that all future AAs would trudge the road of happy destiny together. However, over the ensuing years, Bill witnessed new groups falling apart almost as rapidly as they were forming. As the number of groups grew, Bill lamented that the specters of disunity and collapse grew to frightening proportions. And to make matters worse, there was little or nothing that Bill could do about it. One day, a Japanese member visited headquarters in New York and declared that awful things were happening in Japan. As a result, there were 2 kinds of AA, the member declared. In Japan, one of the groups had 10 steps and a fee of 100 yen. In the meantime, a Norway group had the book and made a 7-step program. I mean, as frightening as this and many similar departures from the program seemed, Bill learned over time that while such deviations proved ruinous for groups, it had little impact on AA. Like the Rule 62 analogy in his essay, Bill hoped that when such flare-ups occurred, groups would see the value of returning to the principles of the program. Bill said, "Today it is only amusing. We know that they will soon be infiltrated by common sense and experience. They will find that nobody can professionalize AA's 12th step, and the elder who means well does badly will mend his ways." Bill then concluded with a statement that is, in fact, a consideration for all groups when shaping their customs and practices. He said he will finally see that alcoholism is a quest for survival in which the good is sometimes the enemy of the best, and that only the best can bring true good. Nonetheless, how could Bill craft guidelines for a group of alcoholics who are already prone to anarchy? Ironically, the answer was to encourage autonomy. To an outsider, this tradition may seem contradictory to AA unity. To Bill, the problem was not whether groups should be autonomous, it was whether one could have a philosophy of autonomy and at the same time unity in AA. Applying Tradition 4 in conjunction with the other traditions was only a partial solution. The real solution was in Bill's dream for alcoholics or children of chaos, as he refers to AA members in this essay, to take responsibility for AA. Well, how is it that this tradition is such a brilliant tool for fostering unity in AA? Group autonomy for alcoholics was a fait accompli. What Bill said was, as one of the people who helped start this movement, I thought for a long time that I would be able to manage it from New York, but I soon found I could do no such thing. Neither could anybody else in AA's headquarters. Bill summarized his correspondence with headstrong leaders like himself when he said, "The group said to us, we like what you're doing. Sometimes your suggestions and advice are good, but whether to take you or leave you alone is going to be our decision. Out in the groups, we are going to run our own show. We are not going to have a personal government in New York or anywhere else. Services, yes, but government, no." Well, Bill did paint a detailed picture of total recalcitrance, but in fact, newly forming groups were hungry for guidance from headquarters. Still, Bill encouraged autonomy. When they had problems, he would write, "If I understand correctly, your problem sounds similar to, on that occasion, these good people, now you're sober, can only relate to you what they seem to have learned from past experience. Perhaps you and your group will choose to follow this, but whether you do or not, please let us know how it comes out." I mean, after all, good teachers teach. Brilliant teachers let students make mistakes. Bill knew what alcoholics were like. A declaration that was only one path to a spiritual experience would have turned many away from the program. And since Bill wanted to have a conference of delegates, he wanted the groups to be assured that the conference could not tell them what to do. Mandating how groups must conduct their activities would have destroyed any chance for unity in AA. And at least to my way of thinking, and I should flash a yellow caution light every time I use that phrase, well, anyway, to my way of thinking, Bill's invitation to experiment provided some evidence of his own humility and open-mindedness. Bill himself was curious and inventive. Experimentation was an essential characteristic throughout his life. Many people know about the boomerang incident in which Bill's grandfather challenged him to make a boomerang. telling Bill that was something only the Australians could do. Bill stubbornly spent 6 months with multiple failures, one of which he cut from his own bed's headboard. Successful at last, Bill threw his boomerang, which indeed circled back, but it nearly hit his grandfather on the head. So remember, when Bill and Dr. Bob first started working with others, they did not have a program. They had ideas about what should be done, and keep in mind the ideas that were planted in Akron were nurtured by Dr. Bob. In New York, those ideas were transformed in substantive ways by Bill and Hank Parkhurst and others. During the flying blind period, they were experimenting with all kinds of innovations with the recovery program. Part of the experimentation included detoxing, or what Bill referred to as a tapering off process. Recall Dr. Bob's bottle of beer going into surgery. And experimental detoxing, which could also extend to a combination of tomato juice and sauerkraut and Karo syrup. I'm glad I missed that. And we all know that working with others can sometimes be tantamount to the blind leading the blind, as exhibited by the experimental hand-picking of 12-steppers. Much more effective when a group can finagle around and find the best guy at the right psychological times. I don't know if you can call what was done in those early days experimenting, or it was more like shooting an arrow at the side of the barn and running up and drawing a circle around it and then calling it a bullseye. But how are we going to know if we don't try? So, successes and failures included Bill's dark but empathetic humor, which elicited raucous laughter, setting the tone for belly laughs in AA. And borrowing from the Oxford group, Bill introduced himself as, "My name is Bill, I'm an alcoholic," which quickly became an AA custom. Experimentation extended to new formats for groups, such as beginners meetings, which helped to filter out the less than sincere prospects. Another method for minimizing disruptions in meetings led to sponsorship in Cleveland. And of course, some experiments met with mixed results, if not outright disasters, such as having alcoholics stay in homes. Well, that didn't work out very well for Bill and Lois. Another problem-solving approach led to alcoholic women being pushed on alcoholics' wives. A very bad idea indeed. We talked about the personal interpretations of the Big Book, Clarence S.'s Christian-focused approach, and Ray W.'s atheistic declarations in San Francisco. Both men were modeling their own interpretations that were poles apart. These and other strokes of inspiration were much like the proverbial boomerang, coming back and hitting the group members on the head at times. A range of approaches to the newcomer, from prayerful surrender to abrasiveness that broke all rules of caution and discreet approach to newcomers, were tried in those early days. You just have to make sure that whatever experiment you're doing, it doesn't come back and hurt someone. I remain amazed that group's machinations did not keep Bill up at night. He admitted that sending a member named Irwin after those poor alcoholics down south gave him cause to pause. Yet he said, "But this ultra liberty is not so risky as it looks." In the end, the innovators would have to adopt AA principles, at least some of them, in order to remain sober at all. Bill went on to acknowledge that the rewards that come with innovation. If, on the other hand, they found something better than AA, or if they were able to improve on our methods, then in all probability we would adopt what they have discovered for general use everywhere. Bill had already expressed his frustration about being unable to make any changes to the Big Book after its second printing. He went on hopefully and said, "This sort of liberty also prevents AA from becoming a frozen set of dogmatic principles that could not be changed even when obviously wrong. Healthy trial and error always have their place, day and place, in AA." Well, Healthy trial and error, and sometimes unhealthy trial and error, contributed to the 12 points to assure our future. He said, implicit throughout AA's traditions is the confession that our fellowship has its sins. We confess that we have character defects as a society, and that these defects threaten us continuously. Our traditions are a guide to better ways of working and living, and they are also our antidote for our various maladies. Well, in terms of autonomy, is innovation dangerous? Bill would say it is if it affects other groups or AA as a whole, something individual groups forget. This is most likely to happen if groups disregard any one or more of the other traditions when experimenting with an innovation. It is also very likely to happen if groups act out of their collective character defects, usually born out of fear. Such was the climate when the first special groups were started. Bill dreamed in a vision for you that AA groups would warmly welcome anyone. No one would be too discredited, and societal distinctions would be laughed out of countenance. Unfortunately, groups did use autonomy to support discrimination, and as a result denied help to struggling alcoholics who did not fit their members' particular profile. And as we have said before, to turn anyone away from the help the fellowship had to offer was tantamount to pronouncing a death sentence. AA groups' early history of offering outcasts the option of creating their own special groups was encouraged, but it was at best a bandage to cover up bias, if not outright rejection, in those early days. So it was no wonder that the first AA groups for women started as early as 1942 and for blacks as early as 1945. Obviously, Bill's ideal did not hold up under the reality of social constraints within the United States, particularly during the 1940s and, unfortunately, for far too many years after. With two special groups, however, already in place, it was not long before others followed. Eventually, the reasons for starting such groups shifted to more positive motives. The reality of those societal constraints gave way to comfort and commonality for those who were seeking help with their alcoholism. It's not a stretch to see why young alcoholics would have difficulty relating to older alcoholics, for all millennia generations have their own language and their own problems that are peculiar to their age group. Thus, young alcoholics sought out other young alcoholics starting in 1946. Post-tradition special groups continued to increase for alcoholics seeking the comfort of being with others who shared their common experiences or professions. International Doctors in AA was created in 1949, and one that raises my eyebrows, Birds of a Feather for Pilots. Well, I don't want to hear their qualifying story. They were formed in 1975. AA group autonomy provided the opportunity to offer a wide array of special groups for alcoholics, including, but not limited to, atheist, dual-diagnosed depression and alcoholic, lawyers, and gays. All serve the important need of providing a safe haven for prospects whose issues are familiar to the members of their special group. There is only one caveat. Recalling from our last presentation that highly charged vote at the 1974 General Service Conference that allowed gay meetings to be listed in the World Directory, Barry L. said, and then to put the icing on the cake, immediately after that successful vote was announced, somebody said, "I want to propose a resolution that it is the consensus of the conference that no AA group anywhere of any kind should ever turn a newcomer away from his or her first meeting." And that was passed unanimously. And our AA group pamphlet echoes that echoes that resolution, I should say. Some AAs come together as AA groups for men, women, young people, doctors, gays, and others. If the members are all alcoholics, and if they open the door to all alcoholics who seek help, profession, gender, other distinction, and meet all other aspects of defining an AA group, they may call themselves an AA group. Well, isn't that nice how everything worked out for the best? I suppose it is one example of how our principles finally prevailed. Bill had an inordinate amount of faith in our principles and our traditions, and he articulated this faith with remarkable bravado. He said, "Some may think that we have carried the principle of group autonomy to extremes. Autonomy means that these 2 or 3 alcoholics could try for sobriety in any way they liked." Then he went on further. He said they could disagree with any or all of AA's principles and still call themselves an AA group. My goodness! Now, a very good example of that exists in Akron and Cleveland AA literature sales. They serve examples of how group autonomy may allow for a departure from some of the traditions. Akron and AA and Cleveland AA summon their role in AA's history to sell publications from the pre-traditions era that one will not find in AA's conference-approved literature. Some of the literature is unambiguously Christian-based. Akron AA does provide an explanation and qualification on the binder of a package of these publications. It says, "This historical literature was written by Evan W. at the request of Dr. Bob. He felt that the newly written Big Book was too difficult for the blue-collar worker to read." Evan was a former writer for the newspaper and wrote a Manual for Alcoholics Anonymous in 1941, followed by a second reader for Alcoholics Anonymous. These pamphlets were completed by 1950 and reflected the early mindset of Akron's earliest members. The binder then makes a very important disclaimer and interesting justification. It says this literature is pre-conference. That is, it came out before the conference which would approve literature was established, and is still serving members of AA around the world. Published and distributed by the Akron Area Intergroup primarily for its historical value, but also to serve the purpose for which it was originally intended, to help us all better understand the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Well, besides the pamphlet on the 4 absolutes, there is the second reader mentioned, and that includes a statement that says that there is no mystery in the spiritual side of AA. As a matter of fact, the good active member is practicing Christianity at all times, whether or not he knows it. In Spiritual Milestones for Alcoholics Anonymous, it says the unselfish helping of others is the practice of love upon which Christian philosophy is based. Remember at all times our Lord's 2 commandments, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul and with all thy mind, and thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." On these 2 commandments hang all the laws and the prophets. Well, this may seem to fly in the face of Bill's essay in this tradition when he says, a group ought not do anything which would greatly injure AA as a whole, nor ought it affiliate itself with anything or anybody else. There would be real danger should we commence to call some groups wet, others dry, still others Republican or Communist, and yet others Catholic or Protestant. Well, when I first read these, I have to admit that I did get a little huffy. Now, just to clarify, Cleveland also sells pamphlets, Many Paths to Spirituality, and The God Word for Atheists and Agnostics in AA. But then as I reflected on the traditions and the purpose of the traditions, and as I looked at Akron and Cleveland's history, well, it's clear they cherished their historical and their irrefutable contributions to early AA. I mean, after all, AAs from around the world attend Akron's Founders Day in June, which is closely equivalent to attending an AA International Convention. There is certainly no denying Cleveland and Akron's role in the success and rapid growth of alcoholics. As I mentioned earlier, many people thought that it originated in Cleveland. And so I finally realized that AA's complex beginnings and the preservation of this history may be a case of how our traditions achieved Bill's dream of group autonomy and all that autonomy means, and the unity of the fellowship. Akron and Cleveland AA are a part of our conference, and that is something for which we should all be proud. Well, what is the motivation not to abuse the principle of autonomy? Well, as Bill has always said, it was alcoholism. He said there's authority enough, love enough, and punishment enough, all without human being clutching the handles of power. Such is AA's backstop against dissolution and its final guarantee of survival under any conditions. For us, it is to do or die. And for many years after the traditions were adopted, the conference was approved, the majority non-alcoholic trustees clutched the handles of power in AA. So again, the question became, can children of chaos grow up? Unfortunately, there were very influential voices in early AA, mostly in the form of non-alcoholic and alcoholic trustees on the board, and some delegates who were convinced that even in recovery, alcoholics would never be able to adhere to the traditions and be fully responsible, at least not enough to lead AA. This obstacle stood in the way of Bill's last hope for unity, and that was for AA groups to take full responsibility for AA's future. Bill would struggle for years trying to convince the naysayers that alcoholics could be responsible for AA. That is, they could be the majority of the trustees on the board. And he firmly believed that would prove true even with traditions that were unenforceable and appeared to encourage anarchy. Again, he had so much faith in alcoholics in AA. We'll later learn that his most difficult opponent would be one of his dearest non-alcoholic friends, Dr. Harry Tebow. And we'll do that deep dive in that struggle when we do the presentation on Tradition 9. But for now, let's revisit the long form of this tradition. The first sentence calls upon the spiritual principle of the second tradition when it says, with respect to its own affairs, each AA group should be responsible under no authority other than its own conscience. The next sentence asks for courtesy and concern for groups that are neighbors, sensitivity to issues such as conflicts in meeting time, space, availability of meetings for other populations, maybe even policy decisions are among the considerations for discussion. He says, but when its plans concern the welfare of neighboring groups, also those groups ought to be consulted. And now our neighboring groups are worldwide. Then the group is charged to be carefully and objectively examine all of the traditions and any other relevant literature provided by the General Service Office. That is, make sure your group conscience is an informed group conscience. If there is doubt, it suggests seeking the board's guidance. It says, and no group, regional committee, or individual should ever take any action that might greatly affect AA as a whole without conferring with the trustees of the General Service Board. Keep in mind that the group is not asking the General Service Board for permission. Groups are free to do what they think is best for carrying the message. I'm going to venture to say that the conference is not nearly as free to do whatever it wants, and that's a good thing. Those traditions are real guardrails for the conference. But consulting the General Service Board is an opportunity to tap into the vast experience, strength, and hope of past AA groups. With careful research, the group can conduct an informed group conscience. Coming up, the fifth tradition. The fourth tradition needs all of the other traditions as an anchor to prevent drifting on a sea of anarchy. It is the fifth tradition that steers the ship. Comments and questions, please contact me at whatslenderthreads@gmail.com or visit my website www.onwhatslenderthreads.com. And thank you.